Yeah.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Betska, the Guru Coach, together with my co-host, Raj Vashisht from Delhi, India. I'm from Vancouver Island. Welcome to our podcast, Mindful Leadership Beyond Borders. And our special guest today is named Esther Charlie. And I met this woman at the Women of Influence Award gala and here on Vancouver Island, and the room was packed. I think 600 people or something. Esther, right? Yeah. And women were getting prizes, awards in different categories. It was the first one ever for the Nanaimo, Vancouver Island area, and I was very moved by all these women, all this talent. Oh my gosh! And Esther won in the category of health and wellness. So there's a lot of depth to this woman, and I don't know if we're going to be able to fully capture it in a couple of segments here, but we're going to do our best. So let me introduce Esther, and we will also have her introduction above our videos. So Esther Charlie, pronounced Chwinek, I think. Yay, okay.
Yes.
Is a strong Indigenous woman, and I mean strong, that comes from the
Itnikatma.
okay,
Iron women.
yeah, Iron women, yeah, in Lytton, BC, and she has resided on Vancouver Island for over 40 years, and the last 20 years in the which territory?
Nanaimo territory.
Nanaimo. Nanaimo. That's right. I'm doing pretty good, right?
Yes, yes.
And I was just very touched by Esther was sitting at this large table with many of her family members and friends, and when she won, I mean that table erupted with joy. They were clearly saying to the world that Esther deserves to win this award. So, Esther, welcome to our show. And let me introduce her a little bit more. She is a 60s scoop survivor, and in a moment we'll talk about that. And her personal healing journey has influenced her passion to promote holistic wellness for all individuals. Her commitment and intention are to create supportive environments that are Indigenous informed and culturally safe. Key word there, culturally safe. Yeah. Esther has been blessed to work with and support several Coast Salish elders and families. Many have generously shared their teachings and cultural ways, which has contributed to Esther's own personal and professional practice. So, welcome, Esther. I can only imagine what your life has been like so far. In the introduction, I talked about you being a 60s scoop survivor. How can you briefly tell us what that means so that everyone understands?
First, want to raise my hands to each and every one of you and those that will witness this podcast. Thank you so much for inviting me to come and join you. It's an honor. I'm presently residing on this Nanaimo territory. My partner is from this traditional territory. So I just want to acknowledge that and raise my hands to each and every one of you. And thank you again. Yes, well, as a 60 scoop survivor, my mother was a residential school survivor, and my father was French Canadian from back east. The 60 scoop happened as a result of, I want to say, of colonialism, but also the impacts of residential school. I share that, residential school taught our people not to talk, not to feel, and not to trust. So if you imagine broken family systems and the grief and loss that our grandparents and great grandparents experienced, and then my mother, who had been traumatized from residential school. And back in the 60s, there wasn't a lot of mental health support. So where did people turn to work through or to talk about, and who did they trust to talk about what had happened or what they experienced. So as many of us, and I also can acknowledge that I used Alcon drugs to cope with my own trauma for a number of years until I got help, and that changed my life. And so I think that as a result of colonialism and residential school, they started taking, and it was a continued process of assimilation, because what they wanted to do was wipe us out as Indigenous people. They wanted to get rid of the Indian problem. And
Mm-hmm.
and and I think that in 2010, I went to the Justice Institute in New Westminster and took the Aboriginal leadership course. And that was a huge turning point for me to understand the history of our people. And I got very angry at looking at the truth and what actually happened and what their intention was.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my interpretation. I don't claim to be an expert in any area. I think I've been very blessed and gathered teachings because I didn't grow up in my traditional territory. That's a part of the 60 scoop as well. That part of assimilation and separation, displacement. I didn't grow up with traditional teachings. So when I say I'm very grateful for the Coast Salish people and all the other ones that have shared their gifts with me culturally, I've picked up what works for me. And that's how I walk today. That's what supports me in my well-being. That's how I've become a strong Indigenous woman, is
Ah,
being able to practice these things that support my well-being.
right on. Thank you. So when we refer to the 60s scoop, it's about people, children being scooped out of their homes and put into these residential schools, and some of those children never saw their parents again, right?
So
And
just to
yeah,
clarify, the residential school scooped the children and put them in residential schools.
right.
After, the 60s scoop was a continuation, but they removed the children from their homes and put them in non-Indigenous homes.
Oh, right. Yes. Okay, got it. Now I got it. Okay. Okay, got it. And of course, uh, most people who've done some reading or watching understand that in the residential school situation, many of those children were abused, sexually, emotionally, spiritually, and so on and so forth. And I mean, maybe we don't know everything that happened when the indigenous children were put into non-indigenous homes. That's
Right.
we don't, maybe we don't know everything. But tell me, what do you think? How would you describe the harm to the indigenous people caused by colonialism, by this, what, the governments and school, the religions and so on, what they did to the indigenous people? How would you describe that harm? Can you even describe it?
It's difficult to put words to it because the present impact on the generations, I'm second generation, so that means my mother went to residential school. I have a son who has been impacted by residential school because of what I learned. So
Ah,
that generational trauma continues. I think that for many of our people, some will go to the other side and never speak their truth about what happened in residential school.
right.
With that harm or that trauma not being addressed, we pass it on. Whatever way, it may not be as horrific as it was in residential school, but we know that when we suppress our emotion, our feelings, it comes out in different ways. So
Right.
if we're hurting, it might come out in anger, or we may have found different ways of coping. And we talked a little bit about that, with my own addiction. That's what I used to avoid my pain that I experienced growing up.
Mm. So, what I'm learning from you is that your passion is to create opportunities for Indigenous people to live a better life for themselves. Is that correct? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to take a pause and we're going to come back for part two, and we're going to invite you to describe what those opportunities are.
Thank you.